As tech developed in mountain biking, it often became more and more complicated, and some would say it would detract from the ride experience. However, actually I disagree, and I think in some ways actually enhances it. In fact, some of the most influential tech in mountain biking has actually opened it up more as a whole and simplified things a lot more. So without hanging around anymore, let's take a look at some of the top tech innovations that have improved mountain biking. Looking back, it's hard to imagine a time when clutch mechs weren't a thing. The era of the front mech and dropping chains is almost long gone and forgotten. And since its debut back in 2011 when Shimano brought out the first clutch mech, I don't think I've actually ever dropped a chain properly since. The clutch of a rear mech adds tension onto the spring basically, so it stops the cage from swinging around up and down, causing that chain to flap around a lot less. It's a fairly simple system and one that is often taken for granted nowadays, but it makes a huge difference on a mountain bike. And another bonus feature of it, it actually makes bikes a lot quieter. Perfect. Now back before when clutch mechs were a thing, there were other sort of various bits and bobs that people tried to invent and use to keep that chain tight and from flapping around. Speaking of dropped chains and front mechs, the next innovation has got to be the narrow wide chainring. Now, when Shimano released their clutch mech back in 2011, SRAM had to quickly counter obviously, but then a few years later they took it a step further and came up with their own narrow wide chainring. And this was soon released on their first 1x legit group set, the XX1. Now this new group set at the time, it came with a new rear mech, it came with a huge, again for the time, 1042 tooth cassette and SRAM's own proprietary hub body. Most noticeably though, SRAM brought out their new X-Sync narrow wide chainring to help keep that chain in place. SRAM could have relied on a chain guide to hold that chain in place, but instead they brought out the narrow wide, and I'm sure once they did, a lot of companies were absolutely kicking themselves thinking, why the heck didn't we think of that? It's such a simple but brilliantly executed idea. And how it works is basically the tooth profiles on the chainring are machined one narrow, one wide, alternating all the way around so that they fit precisely within the links of the chain. So as the chain links narrow and wide, that slots perfectly onto the chainring. Therefore, there's very little room for maneuver, so the chain doesn't jump off. I mean, it is actually pure brilliance when you think about it. Narrow wide chainrings and clutch rear derailleurs are two of the biggest tech innovations I've spoken about so far. However, they are all part of one big old system in the end, and that is the 1x setup that we're so used to seeing nowadays. What is a 1x setup? Well, it's essentially having one sprocket at the front of the bike and all your gearing done at the back, getting rid of the front mech. Now what this has done is freed up a huge amount of real estate around somewhere that's generally quite cluttered, and that is around the bottom bracket. Getting rid of that front mech means that designers can do a lot more there. It's actually also keeping things quieter again. Designing a bike around a front mech does have quite a few design restraints because you've got to fit in pivots if it's a full suspension bike, the front mech, multiple chainrings, tyre clearance. That's a lot of stuff to go on in such a compact area. So by essentially getting rid of that front mech, you're doubling up the free space because not only is that mech gone, but because you're now running a single chainring, the spacings can be done differently. So actually you've got a lot more room for maneuver, and bike designers have a lot more area to play with. Another great bonus, as if there weren't enough, is the simplicity of the system. It's less moving parts, it's less maintenance, there's less you need to do. By taking away some of those moving parts, you've just got less to look after. I mean, for me, that is a winner-winner. Finally, one of the biggest reservations there was with getting rid of the front mech or the 1x setup was the loss of the gear ratios early on. Now, because you were getting rid of two chainrings, possibly one chainring at the front or 2x3 or whatever you had, you were reducing the amount of gears you had significantly. However, now with these wide range 12-speed cassettes, that has been well and truly quashed. That is no longer an issue, with cassettes going from 10 all the way up to 51, 52 tooth, so a huge amount of gearing. So 1x, winner. The ability to put your saddle up and down is such a simple yet brilliant idea. Just the amazing thing that you can do, just having your saddle up and down wherever you want it, seems such a novel thing. And yet back in the day, people thought that that was madness. They thought there's nothing wrong with just stopping, undoing your quick release or whatever, drop your seat and off you pop down the hill. That actually the idea seemed a bit mad at the beginning. However, nowadays we wouldn't think twice about running a dropper. And most people who have been converted to droppers would never go back. You can ride a trail and just at the press of a button drop your seat out the way. No more just up and down, having to stop. As trails, you know, they undulate, they go all over the place. You don't just go straight up or straight back down. So having that ability, like I said, at the press of a button makes life so much better. And I think we'd be lost without them. Pretty much all bikes come with them now. I mean, even XC racers are using them. So, you know, drop a post. That is a tech innovation I can get on board with. Forward geometry is essentially the geometry we know of today. However, back in 2012, Mondraker was sort of the first to bring this on. They were lengthening top tubes, shortening stems, slackening head angles, and dropping bottom brackets. And yep, they called it forward geometry. However, that is almost normal geometry today, but they were so ahead of the times that actually companies today are sort of still just catching up with that now. For the longest time, mountain bikes just took the geometry of road bikes, tweaked it slightly and made it a mountain bike. Sizing was still done on numbers such as seat tube length or top tube length, which today is a very dated way of doing it. They never looked at things like reach. Reach was never really changed from size to size. However, nowadays reach is a huge number that plays a part in the sizing of a bike and changes significantly from size to size, from small, medium, large, extra large and onwards. Bikes have gotten longer, lower and slacker now for nearly the last decade, so looking at numbers like reach has really played a part in the sizing of a bike. Because our bikes have changed dramatically, the way we ride them has also changed to adapt. Bikes have become more stable at speed and more comfortable. So looking at these numbers sits you nice and better in the bike, just a lot more comfortably in there. So again, forward geometry as another tech innovation that I think has really adapted and changed the way we are today on a bicycle. The AHEADSET, or headset as it's known today, was introduced by Diacomp, now Cane Creek, and simply revolutionized the front end of bikes. It made a huge difference. Now the headset is essentially two cups, one at the top, one at the bottom, which house bearings that are pressed into the frame. This then has the steerer tube running up through the middle where the stem clamps to on top. But wait, here's the really clever bit. A star nut is then pressed into the steerer tube at the top, whereby a cap is then screwed into and clamps and compresses the entire system, pulling it all nice and tightly together so that there's no play in the forks whatsoever, so there's no rocking backwards and forwards like you might feel sometimes. It's a really clever system. Before this system was invented, everyone was messing around with a threaded headset. Now what this was as the steerer tube went up through the head tube of the bike, it was then threaded and a nut was done up tight to pull the system together. Now, as for a stem, this was of the quill variety. Now, it had a split in it, so once you slotted the stem down in and tightened the bolt up, this essentially pulled two wedges together and pulled it nice and tight. The problem was that this system was unreliable and came loose all the time and was just a bit, well, dated, shall we say. So once the headset system came along, it actually gave designers and manufacturers way more room to maneuver and play with frame designs and fork designs and just a better, stronger system. Winner, winner again. What another mad marvel of the bike world, eh? We've had suspension in mountain biking for nearly 3 decades, but it's nothing that should be taken for granted. Just look at how it affects how we ride and the bikes that we ride nowadays. Now, like I said, 3 decades worth of suspension is a long time, but just think how much it's come along in the last 5 years alone. I mean, we are a far cry from the world of the humble elastomer back in the day. There's a big mix of frame designs and suspension units out there. Things have changed a lot over the years, adaptations, different designs, and it seems to me that slowly over the years we've whittled down those designs. So there used to be quite a lot of different frame designs out there. Now I think as we get things that are more proven and definitely work, although you get slight adaptations of this, the actual frame designs themselves have slowly come down in numbers. Shocks and forks have evolved so much over the days that it is crazy. Just think back in the day when Marzocchi released that Z1. I mean, I can remember having a pair and I thought they were the greatest thing to ever hit the mountain bike. But progress through suspension and shocks was super steep. I mean, they were learning things at a fast rate that actually nowadays it seems almost lesser, where they've come on such a long way and suspension units are so good. The improvements in them are sort of much more incremental, much smaller increments, rather than back in the day, they were like learning so much so quickly. What I think is possibly the best thing about sort of these improvements in suspension tech then is how they've helped bikes come along in such a short time. Think back in the day when you'd maybe have lots of different bikes, lots of different horses for different courses. Now suspension units and bike design go hand in hand and work so well together that things like trail bikes and enduro bikes are just so capable. You could get a really short travel trail bike or down country bike if you like that could do the same as an enduro bike and an XC bike. Granted, it might not be quite as capable as the big enduro or as light as the XC bike, but it's still going to be able to do everything. And that is because the suspension units on that bike and the frame designed around those is just so clever. That wouldn't even be possible back in the day when you had a really short 80mm or 100mm travel fork, which was essentially just a spring and would just bang through all its travel, compared to a 6-inch downhill bike back in the day. Tubeless tyres have all but eradicated one of the most annoying problems out there, the puncture. I mean, not so long ago, it feels like we were getting punctures left, right and centre, running skinny inner tubes, and we were all experts at how to fix them. Whipping that tube out, getting the puncture repair kit out and carrying back on almost seemed normal and commonplace within a ride. Actually, nowadays, I bet you most up-and-coming riders or most younger riders don't even know how to work a puncture repair kit. Oof, crazy. Tubeless tyres not only prevent the majority of punctures, but actually they improve the performance of your bike. Because you've got no inner tube in there, you don't have to worry about a snake bite. So you can run lower pressures, which again improve grip on the trail, always a good thing I think. But they've also got thicker sidewalls, so actually the stability of the tyre is a lot better. It doesn't sort of deform underneath the bike so much when you're running those softer pressures. Really a simple win in my book. Gone is the tube, in with the tubeless tyres, winner. Wide handlebars and short stems, they changed how mountain bike handling feels. Fact, the shorter stem changed the axis of where the steering was done. So the shorter stem gave you a more direct feeling of steering. However, this was at the consequence of being a little twitchier. But the wider bars have counteracted that, so actually you get more control. I know, winner, right? This was especially apparent when things like forward geometry and longer top tubes and bigger reaches came into effect when Mondraker started adapting that. Now, I couldn't really think back to the days when we were running big long stems and really narrow bars and things were just twitching all over the place. That just seems, well, it just seems crazy. Again, it just seems like evolution of the mountain bike. Short stems, wide bars, goodbye narrow bars, long stems. But that's it, that's enough from me on tech today. I hope you've enjoyed my foray into the tech channel and obviously some innovations that have changed mountain biking over the years. If you like this video, don't forget, hit the old subscribe button below. As always, have a great ride, stay safe everyone, and I'll catch you later.